The United States has imposed sanctions on Ethiopia following the continued fighting in the country's northern Tigray region. It says that parties to the conflict have not made a meaningful effort to end hostilities in the region or engage in peaceful resolution. The Ethiopian government has called the decision unfortunate as it accuses the US of meddling in its internal affairs. The government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed launched a military operation in the Tigray region in November 2020 against forces loyal to the Tigray People Liberation Front. Well, 6 months later, the conflict continues and a major humanitarian crisis affecting over 4 million people in the area has continued. The SABC's Coletta Wanjohi reports now from Addis Ababa.
The US sanctions include visa restriction policy for current or former Ethiopian government officials, members of the security forces and other individuals. Some members of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the party whose forces are fighting with the government in the region, will also be targeted. Washington says that it will place also restrictions on economic and security assistance to Ethiopia. The US is the largest provider of bilateral assistance in Ethiopia. Its long-term investments in the country over the past 5 years alone amount to over $4 billion. The sanctions also apply to Eritrean government officials, in addition to the existing broad restrictions on assistance to Eritrea from the US. Eritrea, which has admitted to having personnel in Tigray, is being blamed for refusing to withdraw its troops from the area. Fighting continues in parts of the Tigray region, with the UN estimating that over 4 million people need emergency assistance. The government of Ethiopia has given access to humanitarian agencies to distribute aid, but the UN says it is not reaching everybody, partly because of insecurity. Cases of sexual violence, killings, forced removals, sexual violence and other human rights violations and abuses continue to be reported in the Tigray region. Coletta Wanjohi for SABC News in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
For some analysis, we're now joined by Dr. Awol Allo, who's a senior lecturer from the University of Kiel School of Law in the United Kingdom. Dr. Allo, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
I suppose it's an expected response from the Prime Minister, the US meddling in the internal affairs of government in Ethiopia. Is that what the US is doing?
Well, I think states usually invoke the ideas of sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence, principles that are enshrined in the United Nations Charter whenever there are interventions of any form. But I think the world had come so far in terms of how ideas of sovereignty and political independence are taught about today. Sovereignty, of course, it means power. Of course, it means authority or acting on behalf of your people. But sovereignty also means responsibility. That is responsibility to protect your own civilian population, particularly from atrocity crimes such as ethnic cleansing, war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide. The accusation in the northern parts of Ethiopia, in Tigray, has to do with these mass atrocity crimes. And the United States have been trying to engage Ethiopia since the Biden administration came into power. A couple of months ago, the administration sent a very close ally of the president, a senator, to Ethiopia to engage with the Ethiopian government. More recently, the US administration established a new position for the Horn of Africa special envoy. He has been to the region, met with Ethiopian authorities. It seems that the Ethiopians have not moved sufficiently in terms of addressing the humanitarian crisis and moving towards a political resolution. And I think this is part of the global pressure against the Ethiopian government to step up and do what needs to be done in bringing the conflict to a peaceful resolution.
How effective can sanctions be against Addis?
I think the influence that the United States have is significant. It's not just the specific sanctions that the United States is imposing as a government, but also what the United States could do within multilateral trading institutions, within other international institutions such as the UN, the influence that the United States would have on other countries, for example, the EU, which is also considering its own sanctions on Ethiopia. Ethiopia receives a significant amount of development aid and other forms of assistance, including security assistance. So to a large extent, this is a country that relies on foreign assistance. Over the last several years, Ethiopia was the highest recipient of foreign aid from the United States and also from the Europeans. So economically, from a security point of view, and also from a reputational point of view, I think this is damaging for Ethiopia. And I don't think one can overestimate how significant this is for Ethiopia.
Can Abiy Ahmed afford to dig in his heels, given what you've just said?
I think that appears to be the mood on the part of the government and its supporters, basically really making some very bizarre claims that the West is being envious because Ethiopia is marching on a path to prosperity and so on and so forth. To some extent, this kind of rhetoric may be appealing to certain sections of the Ethiopian public. But I think this is a very difficult sell, particularly as those sanctions began to have impact on the economy and bite people and influential actors, both politically, economically, and also socially. The country already finds itself in an armed conflict, not just in the northern part of Tigray, but also in the western and the southern part of the country. In the Oromia regional states, the largest region, there is an armed insurgency, a significant anger on the part of the public due to the treatment of the government. And it's not clear to me to what extent this kind of response would take the Ethiopian government. The foreign office, the foreign service generally in Ethiopia has been extremely weak, and most of the responses that we have seen so far were merely denials and accusations, not necessarily kind of informed by rational policy positions in terms of dealing constructively with international actors who are expressing these concerns.
So, it wasn't that long ago that Abiy Ahmed was given the Nobel Peace Prize, and there seemed to be great hope of a new order in Ethiopia. Is he and Ethiopia running out of friends with actions such as the ones taken by the US?
I think that's one of the most remarkable developments that we have seen anywhere in recent years. A country that was so hopeful and full of optimism to the point that the majority of the global media have been reporting positive news after positive news. The prime minister was recognized for what was really at the beginning a transformational change that he has instituted, and also a promising start with Eritrea. And all of that turned into what we see now, basically a country seen as a sign and a signifier of crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and also significant regional instability. This is a country until very recently regarded as a beacon of stability in an increasingly volatile and fragile region. And I think that's why the United States and the Europeans have invested very significantly in Ethiopia over the last several years. It's not just because they happen to like Ethiopia or because they were concerned about the human rights and developmental issues in Ethiopia. It was because their own national security interest demanded that they support the Ethiopian government. In the past, they supported the Ethiopian government even in the face of significant human rights issues. But today, I think the Ethiopian government is simply no longer able to convince or persuade its partners that it is a reliable ally in terms of providing the stability and the geostrategic interest the West has on the region. So I think from that point of view, it is a significant reputational and damage in terms of the kind of vision that the image that Ethiopia has at the country.
Does that mean that the international community and a lot of us perhaps did not see Abiy Ahmed for who he really was, and that maybe he was always who we are seeing, but we perhaps chose to see something else?
Look, this is a prime minister who really had such a splendid opportunity to transform Ethiopia. And unfortunately, he chose the wrong partners. Imagine somebody embracing the Eritrean dictator who ruled the country for the last 30 years with an iron fist, somebody who publicly stated that Eritrea didn't need election, Eritrea didn't need democracy, he never held any election, the country doesn't have any constitution to which any public authority, any official refers to in terms of justifying its authority. Abiy Ahmed embraced this individual. Within Ethiopia itself, he embraced forces that are committed to very problematic ideologies. This was somebody who wasted such a splendid opportunity to fit Ethiopia for once and all, and I think he created the impression that he is indeed this transformational leader that had the capacity, the willingness, and also the kind of personal character and attitude that is suitable for a complex transitional process. I think as we have realized, we all misunderstood the signals that we were given. I think, as one of the analysts looking at the region, I was one of those people who got things wrong. And it became quite clear now that the country is no longer on a path to transition. What we see is an authoritarian consolidation, and that is bringing such a significant influence, a significant anger, not only from within the country, but also from the region, the international community, and the country is really going downhill. The problem now is that when countries impose these sanctions and take these measures, taking measures in most cases, while it is not easy, it takes a very long process for them to get to this point. But once they have gotten to this point, removing those sanctions, withdrawing those sanctions becomes a lot more difficult. And I think we have reached a point where it's far more easier today to see how Ethiopia could go down the path of disintegration than this country coming together and forging a common future forward for all its people.
All right, and perhaps finally, elections have been delayed in the country. Tigray says we're not having anything to do with it. This just adds another layer of complications, doesn't it?
Absolutely. If you have asked me about a year ago whether elections should be held or not in Ethiopia, I would have said yes, elections should be held. It is the right thing to do. It would help facilitate Ethiopia's transition. But over the last 1 year, things have changed so significantly, not just after the Tigray war, things began to change long before that, particularly with the assassination of the Oromo artist and activist Hachalu Hundessa and the massive crackdown within the Oromia regional state where the major opposition parties were arrested, therefore leaving the Oromia regional state without any representation from the opposition forces. So at that point, you wonder whether any election would have any consequence, because Oromia is important in the sense that about a third of the MEPs in the country came from that region. It's the largest region in the country. Then, of course, the Tigray war complicated things further to the point where this became a country where there's simply no consensus among the major actors on the future direction of the country. So election now is really a factor that complicates the prospect of Ethiopia going forward as a united country rather than facilitating that possibility. And that's why a large group of independent observers in Ethiopia are now calling for the indefinite postponement of the election and for a national dialogue, for a political process that would bring all actors together to agree on an outline of what Ethiopia's constitutional future should look like. That's, for example, what South Africa did during the transition from apartheid to a multiracial democracy. That's what several countries who succeeded did. What the Abiy administration wants is to simply go through this election where we know for sure that the election would simply crown Abiy Ahmed and his party at the next government, and then use that opportunity to force their own unilateral constitutional settlement on the country. While you have armed conflicts in at least 3 regions in the country, in Oromia and Benchangul Gumuz, Tigray, where significant political actors with huge following are imprisoned without adequate consultation, adequate representation. What this would do is basically return Ethiopia to the situation that we had in the past. In the past, in 1974, 1991, we had political settlements. Those political settlements were not inclusive. The groups that were excluded from those political settlements continued to fight the Ethiopian government. Those governments ended up being autocratic. What we have now is basically a repetition of the same thing. And we are repeating those mistakes in the 21st century, where situations are much different. And I think the prospect of Ethiopia continuing as a united country is very much in doubt.
And that's where we'll leave it. Dr. Awol Allo, thank you so much indeed for your insights this evening. Thank you for your time.